When I was 12 years old, my stepfather lost control during an argument at dinner. He told me that I wasn't his real son anyway, so why would he care what happened to me? My mother sat there in silence. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. For months he had been dropping small comments, that I didn't really belong in the family, that I was just baggage he inherited when he married my mother. He said I ate too much, wasted money, and that real parents didn't have to deal with other people's mistakes. He started small, joking that I didn't look like him at all, not like his biological daughter from his first marriage. He'd forget to buy things for me when doing the family grocery shopping. When other family members asked about me, he presented me as Sarah's son, instead of using my name. Seeing my mother shrink every time he did it was the worst of all. She had once been a confident single mother who proudly showed off my good grades. But with him, she acted as though I were a burden. Last month his daughter came to visit, and he bought her an expensive bicycle she had wanted all year. When I asked why he bought it for her and not for me, he said, "Blood relatives come first." My mother was right there and didn't say a word. 2 weeks later I accidentally broke a glass while washing the dishes. He exploded, yelling that I was careless with other people's things, because nothing in that house belonged to me. Then came parent-teacher conferences. My teacher said I had difficulty concentrating and seemed withdrawn. Instead of asking what was wrong, my stepfather said maybe I had behavioral problems like my biological father, and that was why he had abandoned us. A few days before I ran away, I came home excited because I had made the honor roll again. My stepfather scarcely glanced at my report card and said, "Good grades don't matter much when you're not my responsibility anyway." Without meaning to, I saw a text message on my mother's phone from my biological father begging to see me. The message thread showed he had been trying to contact me for 2 years. My mother had been telling him she didn't want to see me and that I didn't matter to her. On the night I left, she had been drinking and checking the grocery account statements. He showed her the bank records, pointing out everything spent on me, school supplies, clothes, doctor visits. "This is what I pay for someone else's son," he repeated over and over. When I tried to defend myself, saying that I did chores and helped around the house, that was when he erupted again, saying I wasn't his real son. He threw the calculator across the kitchen and told me that no matter how much I washed dishes, it wouldn't compensate for the fact that I wasn't his responsibility. I looked at my mother, hoping she would finally defend me. Instead, she looked at her hands and whispered, "Maybe you should go to your room." That night, I packed my school backpack with clothes and the $47 I'd saved. I also took my birth certificate and a family photo of my biological father holding me as a baby. I climbed out of my bedroom window at 3 in the morning and started walking toward my aunt's house, 3 towns away. She was my father's sister and the only person who had made me feel important. But walking alone in the dark, sleeping in a 24-hour laundromat, eating whatever I could buy from a gas station, none of it hurt as much as seeing my own face on missing person flyers. On the 6th day, starving and exhausted, I finally called my aunt from a payphone. She drove 4 hours immediately to pick me up. When we arrived at my house, police patrols were everywhere. My mother ran out crying, but the first thing my stepfather said was, "And this kid, why is she here?" He didn't look at me when he said it. He asked my mother as if I weren't standing there, as if I hadn't just come back from a week on the street, as if I hadn't slept on a cold laundromat floor, as if I wasn't standing there with blisters on my feet, dirty clothes, and the face of a child who only wanted to be loved. My aunt put a hand on my shoulder and drew me into herself as though protecting me from his words. But the words were already said, and couldn't be taken back. "She's been missing," my mother said, her voice broken, tears that looked sincere but meant nothing to me. "And do you think she can come back now as if nothing happened after everything she caused?" She spoke as if my absence had been a rebellious stunt, not an act of survival. A police officer approached me with a notebook and asked if I was okay, if I had been hurt, if I needed medical attention. I just nodded slowly and shook my head. No, I hadn't been physically hurt. The officer noticed I was clutching something to my chest. It was the photo of my biological father. "Do you want to go with him?" he asked. I didn't know how to answer. All I knew was I didn't want to go back into that house. After a few minutes of tension, my aunt spoke. "She's coming with me. She's not safe here." "You have no right," my stepfather said. "And you have no right to take her," my aunt replied, calmly but firmly, cutting through the tension. Agents intervened, checked documents, explanations, and finally, after verifying my birth certificate and a letter my biological father had left at my aunt's months before, stating he was ready to take responsibility, they allowed me to go with her temporarily until a judge made a decision. During the car ride I fell asleep. It wasn't deep sleep, it was a mixture of exhaustion, anguish, and a feeling of floating somewhere between relief and pain. When I woke, my aunt was covering me with a blanket on her couch. The smell of fresh bread, the way it had filled the house when I was little. Her home was filled with photos of me as a child, things I didn't even remember, a notebook of drawings, a picture I'd drawn at age 6 of her and me holding hands. We had breakfast in silence, hot chocolate and buttered toast. It was the first breakfast I'd ever eaten without fear. On the third day, social workers arrived. They interviewed me, asking if I had been mistreated, if my stepfather had hit me, if my mother had abandoned me. I answered with pauses, searching for the exact words. It wasn't easy explaining that abuse doesn't always come in the form of a punch. Sometimes it comes in the form of absence, indifference, looks that don't see you. I told them about the report card, how my stepfather had thrown it in the trash, about how my mother hid my real father's messages from me. I told them about the night they locked me in my room for speaking at dinner, and how they made me feel invisible. The social worker wrote everything down, but what I remember most is the look in her eyes at the end, sadness mixed with determination. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "This has been building for years." After that, my aunt took me to therapy. At first I didn't speak, I just sat with my arms crossed, staring at the floor. But step by step, I began to let words out, fragments, until one day I told everything, about rejection, about fear, about my mother's silence, about the day I hid in a closet for hours to avoid hearing another argument. A week later, my biological father appeared at the door. I didn't know what that meeting would be like. The last clear memory I had of him was blurry, me playing in a park as a toddler. Now he stood there older, eyes tired, but still the same eyes I had. "I'm sorry," was the first thing he said. I didn't respond, I just hugged him. My mother didn't contact me that month. Not once, no message, no letter, nothing. Until a court summons arrived. She and my stepfather were requesting joint custody. I couldn't believe it. After everything, they wanted me to return to that house. My aunt contacted a lawyer, and so did my father. They said the social worker's report, the messages, my statements would matter, but even with all that, I was afraid. Because the justice system doesn't always understand that abuse leaves no visible bruises, that a silent mother can be painful too. All I knew was I didn't want to go back. And for the first time, that conviction made me feel strong. I couldn't sleep the night before the hearing. My aunt tried to calm me, but when I closed my eyes I dreamed of my old kitchen, the calculator on the floor, my stepfather's voice saying, "You're just an expense," and my mother, always silent, always absent. My father's lawyer prepared me. He said the judge might want to speak with me directly, that I needed to be honest but strong, that I wasn't alone. And even so, I trembled, not from fear of losing the case, but from the fear of seeing them again. When I entered the courtroom, all three were there, my mother, my stepfather, and the lawyer they'd hired. My mother had dark circles under her eyes, her lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. But I wasn't looking for tears, I was looking for answers. My stepfather didn't look at me once. He sat up straight, wearing that same authoritarian posture. It was as if I were just a minor inconvenience in his day. I sat next to my biological father. He took my hand, said nothing, I didn't need it. The judge called the lawyers first, then the testimonies. The social worker spoke about emotional abandonment, how I had been made invisible, despised, silenced. She presented my mother's phone messages, my stepfather's expense sheets marking everything I cost. There was a moment when the judge asked everyone to leave the courtroom. He wanted to hear the adults' accounts without me present. I waited outside for nearly half an hour, my breath caught in my chest. I thought of every night I'd spent washing dishes, each time I was ignored, every blank look I'd been given while I just tried to be accepted. When they called me back, the judge said he wanted to talk to me. Just me. He led me into a small room, no microphones or spectators. Just him and me. "Do you want to speak?" he asked. "Yes," I said. For the first time, I told everything, without hiding, without pausing. I told him how I was treated like an intruder in my own home, how my mother had hidden messages from my real father, how every accomplishment was met with mockery, complaints, contempt. I told him I didn't feel like a daughter, not even like a human being. Sometimes I just wanted peace, a place to breathe without fear. The judge didn't say much. He took notes, thanked me, handed me a tissue, and told me to wait outside. That day there was no immediate verdict. The process would take longer than I thought. In the following months I was called several times, for psychologists, supervised visits, school reports. A routine of reopening the wound every time it began to heal. They allowed me to stay with my aunt during the process. Sometimes I spent weekends at my father's house. He taught me to ride a bike, cook pasta, mend my own backpack. He spoke to me with patience and pride. He listened. Once he asked if I hated him for having disappeared all those years. I answered with a truth that hurt to say, no. But it did hurt. He bowed his head and said he wasn't asking for forgiveness, just time to prove he was really here. My mother sent one letter. It said she missed me, that the house was empty without me, that she didn't understand why I hated her. I tore it up before finishing reading it, because she understood everything, but she chose to do nothing. One evening, a notice came, the trial had concluded, and the final decision would be given in a week. That week was the longest of my life. My father was restless. My aunt tried to distract me. But all I could think about was one thing: if the judge ordered me to return to my mother, would I have the courage to run away again? When the day came, we returned to court. My hands were sweating, I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. The judge read his decision in a calm voice, as though he didn't realize he was about to change my life forever. Given the emotional, psychological, and documentary evidence, this court orders that full legal custody is granted to the biological father. The mother is granted the right to supervised visitation, reviewed quarterly. I didn't understand everything at first, I only heard full custody and biological father. And I knew, right then, that I finally had a real chance to start over. My mother didn't cry, she just lowered her head. My stepfather stood up and left without saying a word. And I breathed, for the first time in a long time. They said the worst had passed, that I was finally safe, that I was in a home where I could be myself. And even though deep down, I knew it was true, I also knew that the worst doesn't always end when you change houses. Sometimes it stays inside, silent, waiting for its moment to reappear. The first weeks living with my father felt strange, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. He tried so hard to do everything right. He cooked with me, helped me with school, asked how I felt. But I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know how to be a normal kid. I didn't know how to trust. I would wake up at night to the sound of a calculator crashing against a wall. I heard my stepfather's voice telling me I wasn't worth it, and sometimes I believed it, no matter how much my father tried to convince me otherwise. One afternoon he found me crying in the bathroom. I had done well on a test, my teacher had praised me in front of the class, but when I saw my grade report at home, I tore it to pieces. I felt guilty that someone cared. That felt unfair, after so long with no support, now someone wanted to celebrate with me. My father didn't judge me. He sat with me on the bathroom floor and said something I never expected. You don't have to be perfect to deserve love. I cried harder because no one had ever told me that before. School was a new challenge. I switched schools, new classmates, new faces, new teachers. Some already knew what had happened. They looked at me with a mix of compassion and curiosity. One day at recess, a girl came up to me. Her name was Amelia. They said you were on the news, that you were the missing girl. Is that true? She asked, straightforwardly. My stomach tightened, not because of the question itself, but because of how natural it was. Yes, I was. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. And to my surprise, Amelia didn't push. She sat beside me and began talking about other things, her cat, her favorite show, the cafeteria food. That day, for the first time, I laughed at school. But every step forward carried a shadow. A few weeks after classes started, we received another notice. My mother had requested a revision of her visitation rights. She wanted to see me unsupervised. My father was upset, but asked me if I wanted to see her, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me needed answers. Another part didn't want to see her again. If you're not ready, you don't have to, my aunt told me over the phone that night. But I had already decided, I wanted to face her. The meeting was at a family service center, a room with toys, low furniture, and discreet cameras in the corners. She arrived before me, sitting with her hands entwined. Her hair was shorter and her eyes sadder. "Hello, my love," she said. When I walked in, I froze. I didn't know whether to hug her or not. Finally, I only nodded and sat across from her. For the first few minutes, she said nothing meaningful. She asked how I was, how school was going, if I had friends. I answered with one-word responses. I couldn't pretend it was a normal conversation, until suddenly she said, "I never wanted you to feel less." It hurt me. Not the words, but that they weren't true. "But you did," I answered. "And you said nothing when he treated me like trash." She lowered her gaze. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't try to defend herself. She was afraid. She whispered, "I thought if I spoke it would make things worse, that if I confronted him I'd hurt you more, and staying silent helped you." I asked, my voice trembling. "Did you realize I was the one who left when I was 12? Do you think that was better?" She broke. She cried for real, but it wasn't enough for me. "No, this time, I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "But I needed to tell you that what you did was cruel." Time stopped. Then a social worker came in to announce our time was up. My mother tried to hug me. I held back. "Not yet," I said, and walked away, my throat tight but feeling lighter. At home, I told my father everything. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. When I finished, he hugged me tightly and said, "Today you took a giant step. I'm proud of you." That night I slept deeply, like I never had in memory. Days began to follow themselves, and for the first time that wasn't scary. I woke up, ate breakfast with my father, went to school, did homework, watched movies in the afternoons. There was a kind of routine I had never had, one where I didn't have to try to be accepted. But there were still silences that accompanied me. Sometimes, walking down the school hallway, I felt everyone was watching, as though they only saw the girl who had run away, the one who'd been on TV, the one with family problems. I didn't know how to stop being that girl, how to simply be me. My aunt visited me every weekend. She always brought something, a dessert, a book, a note of encouragement. "You're not alone," she reminded me. "Even if sometimes it feels that way." One Sunday, while we were baking cookies, she handed me an envelope. "Did this arrive at my house?" I asked, without opening it. It was a letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my mother's. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to know what else she had to say, but curiosity won. I locked myself in my room, sat on my bed, and opened it. "Dear daughter," it began. "I know I have failed, not once, but many times. I have tried to justify myself, but no excuse erases what I allowed. Watching you leave, watching you disappear into the night, was the hardest blow I ever received, and yet you deserved it." I kept reading. She spoke of her fear, her shame, how much she regretted not protecting me. But what surprised me most was the line that changed everything. "I left him 2 weeks ago. He's gone. He will not come back." I stayed still. It was real. She had finally made a decision. I felt a mix of rage and relief, rage because it was too late, relief because at least he was gone. But that didn't change the past. It didn't erase years of silence. Yet something in me wanted to believe she was sincere. I told my father. He just said, "You decide what to do with that. You're not obliged to anything." Weeks passed. I focused on my studies, on my new friends. Emilia became my confidant. I told her the whole story. She didn't look at me with pity, just with respect. "You are stronger than you think," she told me one day. But the story wasn't over, because one day, leaving school, I saw him, my stepfather, standing across the street next to a black car. He stared at me, said nothing, got into the vehicle, and drove off. I felt the ground shake, as though the past had caught up with me once more. I ran to the school and told the secretary. They called my father. He filed a police report, but he had done nothing illegal, he had only been there. That night I didn't sleep. Every shadow in my room seemed a threat, every creak a warning. My father held me tightly and promised no one would hurt me, but the fear had returned. In the next session with my therapist I told her everything. "And what did you feel when you saw him?" she asked. "Anger and fear," I said, "but above all, powerlessness." Why powerlessness? Because I couldn't do anything. Because he was still free. Because he could approach and remind me of everything I'm trying to forget. The therapist looked at me kindly. "And what can you do?" she asked. "Not he, you." I didn't know what to say. I had never thought of that. I had always felt adrift without options. 2 weeks passed with no news, until my mother wrote again. This time it wasn't a letter, it was a message. My aunt forwarded it to me. "I just want to know if you're okay, if you might ever forgive me." I took a deep breath, sat at the computer, and replied for the first time in months. "I don't know, but I'm alive. I'm better, and that's enough for now." I didn't expect a reply, and none came. Life went on. The fear slowly receded. Gradually, I learned to sleep with the lights off, to walk without looking back. One day, walking with Emilia after class, she asked, "Would you like to see her again?" My mother? I thought about it. It wasn't an easy decision. Maybe not now, maybe someday. Because I knew forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. And although I wasn't at the end yet, at least I had begun the journey. It had been 6 months since the judge had granted full custody. 6 months in which my life had started to feel like mine. I no longer counted days with fear, nor measured every word before speaking at home. My father told me I was growing by leaps and bounds. I didn't feel that way. I felt half rebuilt, like a house burned from the inside with the smell of smoke still lingering in the walls. One afternoon in April, after school, my father called me into the living room. "We need to talk," he said, with that tone he used when something serious was coming. He showed me an official letter. My mother had requested a mediated family reconciliation session. She wasn't demanding visits, just a meeting. "You don't have to go," my father said. "But if you want to, I'll be there with you." I didn't answer right away. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the floor. What did she want now? Redemption? Peace? To forgive herself through me? I thought of the night I left, of the $47 I carried with me, of that photo of my father in my arms. I thought of my missing person posters, the laundromat where I slept, the hunger, the sadness, and then I remembered something my therapist had said weeks earlier. Sometimes forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. To let go, to move forward. I said yes. Yes, I wanted to see her, but this time not as the abandoned child, but as someone who had learned to stand on her own. The session took place in the same center where we'd met before. She was there, wearing simple clothes, hair tied back, hands trembling. When she saw me enter, she rose, but I didn't approach. I sat down across from her with my father by my side. The mediator greeted us, explained the process, and then gave us the floor. "You can start if you like," he said to me first. My voice didn't shake. "I don't understand why now." Why after everything you want to see me? She took a deep breath. Because I've been in therapy. Because I needed to understand that I allowed it. What caused it? And did you understand? I asked, without softening my tone. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I froze. I was afraid to be left alone. I had thought he was my only option, but by choosing him, I lost you, and now I realize that was the worst decision of my life. I was silent, not because I had no words, but because, this time, she actually had some. I'm not here to ask you to come back, she continued, nor to erase what happened. I'm here because I want you to know that I do care, that it did hurt, and that I regret it. I didn't know if I believed her. But I knew I needed to hear that. Do you know how many times I dreamed that you would stand up for me? I said, stand up for me, even once. She hung her head. I saw you so small, so strong, and thought you would endure it. I was wrong. I didn't need you to be strong, I needed to be a mother. We cried, not dramatic sobs, but the kind that comes when a truth cuts you deep. The mediator suggested a second meeting, this time in a park, more open, more informal. I said I'd think about it. We left the center without goodbyes, just a small nod, a small gesture of thanks for having come. On the way home, my father asked me how I felt. Empty, but okay, I said. As if I'd opened a door that had been locked for years. He said nothing, he only placed his hand on my shoulder. That night I wrote for the first time in the journal my aunt had given me. I began with one sentence. I am not what they did to me. I am what I decide to do with it. And every word I wrote was a new brick in the house I was rebuilding inside me. But something remained unresolved, because weeks later, an unmarked envelope arrived at my father's house. It was a medical report. My ex-stepfather was gravely ill, with advanced, terminal cancer. And on the last page, a sentence, I would like to see her at least once to say I'm sorry. I read it in silence. I didn't cry, I didn't answer, but I felt something tremble inside me. 3 days later the envelope rested on my desk, untouched. Not for lack of time, but because I didn't know if I should open that last door. What was the point of seeing him now? What was I supposed to find in a man who had seen me only as a cost until the end? My therapist said there's no right answer. You can say no, and you'll still move forward. You can say yes, and maybe find something you didn't expect. I asked if she thought someone like that could feel remorse. Maybe not what you need him to feel, she said, but something that gives you the power to choose. That night I sat with my father. I showed him the document. Do you want to go? He asked. I don't know, I replied, not looking away from the paper. I don't know if I can. Then don't go, he said. But if you decide to, I'll be there. You don't have to face it alone. I spent 2 more days unable to decide, until I awoke in the pre-dawn from a nightmare. He was shouting at me, my silent mother, me running out the window. It was the same dream as always, only this time I stopped at the window. In the dream I didn't escape, I turned around, faced him, and woke up with my heart pounding as though I'd run miles. In that moment I knew, I had to go, not for him, but for me. The visit was arranged by the hospital. It wouldn't be in his room, but in a small family meeting room with a nurse present. My father took me. We spoke little on the ride, I held his hand when we got out of the car. When I entered, I didn't recognize him at first. He was gaunt, thin, skin nearly gray, eyes sunken. He no longer had that threatening presence that had haunted me for years. He looked only like a sick man, and that unsettled me. He stared at me, didn't speak at first, he just watched me, as if he couldn't believe I was actually there. You look different, he said finally. I nodded. I'm not afraid anymore. Silence. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry, that I was cruel, that I was cowardly, that I was wrong so many times, and that you paid for all of it. I listened without blinking. You didn't come to say anything I didn't already know, I said. The only thing I want to know is why. Why so much anger toward a child? He lowered his gaze. Because you reminded me that I was not enough, that I couldn't have a normal family. I felt I didn't belong, and instead of leaving, I blamed you, even though you were only a child. I stayed silent, not for lack of words, but because somehow, that was the saddest confession I had ever heard. Do you know what the worst part was? I said firmly. You never made the effort to know me. You never asked who I am. You only cared about what it cost you to have me here. He nodded. I know. And every night I hear your voice in my head. Every time I close my eyes I see the calculator flying. I see your mother in silence and I see you walking alone at dawn. I don't know if that's regret, but it hurts. I wanted to say so many things, but I didn't say them, because something in me understood that this wasn't the place for reproach anymore. So I stood up. I don't hate you. Not anymore. But I don't expect you to rest in peace with my forgiveness. Rest knowing that despite you, I survived, and I left. I didn't look back. My father was outside. He hugged me without asking anything. On the drive back I felt something strange, not joy, not relief, but a lighter weight, as though I'd finally shed a soaked coat I'd worn for years. Days later we learned he had died. My mother didn't call me, didn't write, only my aunt told me she showed up at the funeral alone. I didn't cry, didn't feel anything, and oddly, that was the most healing part of all. With time, I returned to my classes. Emilia was still my friend. The journal where I wrote filled with pages. And one afternoon, while tidying my room, I found that old photo of my biological father holding me in his arms. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time I saw a child who wasn't broken. She was just waiting to be rescued, by herself. Months passed, leaves began to fall, the wind grew cold, and before I realized it, I turned 13. It was my first birthday that no one forgot. My father baked my favorite cake. Emilia and other school friends came over. My aunt gave me a new hardcover blank journal. She said, "Now you decide what's written here." That phrase stayed with me every day thereafter, because for the first time in my life, the past didn't dictate every word I spoke. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. I still struggled to trust. Sometimes I woke up anxious. I had dreams of my mother staying silent while I yelled to be heard. I began writing more often, not just memories, but what I wanted to be. I made lists, things I want to achieve, people who make me feel good, things I'd like to say to my younger self. And on one of those pages I wrote something that marked the beginning of my true freedom. I don't need anyone to ask forgiveness in order to heal. I don't need the past to be fixed to have a future. The last time I saw my mother was in a bookstore. By chance, I was there with my father. She was alone, browsing a cookbook. She saw me, and for a moment her eyes filled with tears. I didn't run, I didn't hide, I just nodded. She responded with a half-smile, then turned and walked away. My father didn't ask anything, he just put his arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm okay." And I was, because in that moment I understood that I didn't need any more explanations. I already had enough to understand that my mother's silence was a choice, that her absence was a form of presence, the worst kind, and that I had the right not to repeat that pattern, to speak up, to set boundaries, to choose. Months later, in a school talk, the counselor asked the students to write about an experience that marked them. I thought about lying, about inventing something easier, but I decided to tell my story with detail, without embellishment or pity. And at the end I wrote, I wasn't a victim forever. I was a girl who ran away, but also one who returned to face it all. The teacher called me aside. "Do you want it published in a school magazine?" I hesitated, but then thought of the other boys and girls who might feel as invisible, as guilty, as broken as I once did. And I said yes, because if my story could be a mirror for someone else to say, I too can get out of this, then it was worth it. The publication came out a month later. I received messages from classmates who had never spoken to me before. One said, "I was scared at home too. Thank you for writing it." Another wrote, "Your story made me tell mine for the first time." And that's when I understood that telling what happened didn't just heal me, it healed others. And that gave me purpose. At 14 I was no longer the girl who ran away, I was a young woman finding her voice. I began speaking at school workshops about emotional abuse. My aunt accompanied me, my father applauded from the back. Amelia recorded my presentations on her phone. One day, at a talk, a teenager approached me and said, "Your story didn't make me cry, it made me strong." And that's when I knew that all the pain, all the dark days, all the anger and silence had not been in vain. Years later, when I finished high school, I wrote a letter, not to send, but to keep. It was for my mother. I loved you more than you were ever able to protect me, and that no longer hurts because I chose to let it go. Today I have myself, and that is enough. I never saw her again, but I no longer needed her. And that's the point. Life took a lot from me. It stole years that should have been full of love, but it also taught me something very few learn at such a young age: you do not choose what happens to you, but you do choose what to do with what happens. I chose to walk, to speak, to continue, and no one can ever take that away from me.